Hello, everyone, and welcome into FCC Talk. I'm your host, Jon Rhoades, Children and Family Minister here at First Christian Church, and today we are joined by Dan Stribling, the worship minister here at First Christian Church. I almost called you the worship and family minister. You do have a larger family, so maybe you could assume that role.
Sure, why not? If the boot fits.
I think that's how it should go on staff. Whoever has the largest family is now the family minister at the church.
Ooh, I better slow down.
Hey, how you doing today, Dan?
I'm good, John. How you doing?
I'm doing great. We are recording this on Wednesday instead of Thursday, so it's a Wednesday here in the office.
Yep.
Yeah, we had a chapel earlier today, which was nice, and had fun with the kiddos. So it was a good time, and now we're ready to talk some more. So
let's go.
All right, we do want to remind you before we get into it, FCC Talk is a podcast, a YouTube show, whatever you want to call it, with us just talking about current events, news topics, things like that in the Christian world. We do stay politics free. There might be political aspects to some of the stories that we discuss, but we don't focus on those aspects. We just try to focus on the story and then maybe try to learn a thing or two from each story. By no means is this a sermon. Are we declaring that, what we are preaching to you is the absolute truth or anything? A lot of this is opinions, and while we may use the Bible in some way, shape, or form, this is not us saying follow every word we say or else or anything like that.
Yeah.
So a lot of opinions and just news stories keep you informed on what's going on. And as always, we'll have all the links to these articles in the description, so you can feel free to do your own research and figure out more about these if there's anything that we leave out in the podcast. So Dan, we have our first story. Let's get into it.
All right.
Are you familiar with Calvin University, Dan?
I'm not particularly. I know about it. I've heard of it. I know that it exists, but I'm not very familiar with its history or its values, any of that, until today. Anyway, when I
if people don't
saw
know
this
Calvin,
article,
right, that I sent to you.
Uh-huh.
If people don't know, Calvin University is a Reformed university up in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and they obviously, you can tell by the name Calvin, John Calvin. Typically, those things go together. So this university has been struggling lately. They've had enrollment decline, and they've had to cut their budget multiple different times over the past few years. And in May of 2022, they hired a new university president named Wiebe Boer. Now, Wiebe Boer is the son of some missionaries who once attended the university, I think graduated, alums from Calvin University, and he was making a pretty good amount of money, 6 figures. The article states, there was a $100,000 signing bonus, annual bonuses of $200,000. So this was not a low-profile position. This is a very high-profile position, and one that they were paying him well for. However, unfortunately, come February, almost a year into his time there, it became time for Boer to step down. He resigned because of some, complaints, allegations, whatever you want to call it, of him sending unwelcoming or inappropriate messages to vendors of people who are employees
of vendors, I think, is what it said. Mm-hmm.
Employees of vendors of Calvin University. Ever since that happened, even though We Boore did step down and resign, it has since just blown up. He was locked out of his presidential housing. His kids were still enrolled in Grand Rapids School, and they obviously did not have a home to go back to. There was all kinds of anger from the board, from staff in the school and students over the situation in various different ways. This was not communicated well to the university, staff, students, things like that. People were picking a lot of sides. And, like I said, you can read a whole lot more into this story if you want. And Dan, you can fill in any blanks of things that I've missed here. But essentially the story is wrongdoing by the President Boer, and a lot of misinformation, a lot of anger, a lot of people being out there of, being upset. And it's just kind of snowballed into this mess here where the university is now looking for another president, even after they had hoped a couple years ago that they had brought on the president who was going to kind of save them from these struggles. Obviously, their struggles have only gotten worse. Dan, you read the entire story. Other people, I'm sure, will read this after the fact as well. But give us just your general thoughts on We Boore, the story, Calvin University, all those things.
General thoughts. I mean, I have very limited general thoughts just because, it's really hard from a single article to come to any kind of conclusion. The purpose of the article is to kind of say, this is what's happening, and so I can't really take a side. It kind of lists what the allegations are. You've got the school who is saying that he was an at-will employee, so they basically had the right to let him go for anything they see fit, right? So, and they decided that he'd been acting inappropriately, and so he had to go. He's arguing that they're in breach of contract. He's got his wife is arguing, because I suppose she's Caribbean, I believe, and so she's claiming racism against herself. There's just, and it's a lot of the he said she said game, and so the courts are gonna
they won't pay him his contract, and that's the issue there.
That I think they just cut him loose with no severance or anything, but at the same time, once again, we don't know. We don't know the extent of what it was he was saying. The article hints that the person he was texting was probably a minor, because they made an allusion to he was trying to find out if she was going to enroll at Calvin University, so that he could get to know her and stuff like that. So, I mean, for all we know, it could have been some really disgusting stuff that this guy was doing. And I would imagine, because this young lady contacted someone at the school, the board probably saw the text trail. That is readily available information. It's really easy to find. But I don't know. They could have just gone, oh, she's mad. We're worried about a sexual, abuse lawsuit, and so you're gone, buddy. Right. I don't know. But either way, it is a mess. So my general thoughts, that's basically it. And that's just what the article said. I don't know a whole lot about Calvin University. I do know that, the Reformed, side of things tends to be pretty hardline in terms of moral accountability, which I don't think is a bad thing. But what I have witnessed is that also there's generally a little less grace sometimes from that side of the table. But once again, I can't draw any firm judgments because I don't know the individuals. And
yeah, the article stated that, the university does have a history of being rather strict with their staff members. A professor was fired. I forget how.
Which doesn't surprise me.
Right. For officiating a same-sex marriage wedding. I'm trying to figure out when that was. It doesn't say when that was, but
sure.
But there are high-profile alums who have come from this university. Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos, as well as an influential professor in Kristen Kobe's Demuse, a historian and author of Jesus and John Wayne. So this university has some well-known alums. It's just unfortunate at this point that they are deciding to be. I'm not going to say it's unfortunate they're deciding to be strict. I don't think strictness is such a bad thing, but it's unfortunate that, it seems like maybe some of the issues they're having is because they have been more strict and people are upset with that. And obviously, when you get into the money side of things, if you're going to be so strict that you're not going to pay severance or anything like that, that's only going to make it worse, especially for the person who was trying to get paid. And as we know, people will tend to try to grasp onto just about anything to get their money. And I'm not disparaging We Boore here because, like you said, we have no idea what actually went on behind the scenes here. His contract could state that he does, have a right to his money and
could be
what he was entitled there. So I'm not trying to paint him in a bad picture. I'm just saying that this has gotten messy and it's very unfortunate. Because Christian universities are struggling today.
Across the board.
Right. Make money. They're struggling to find people to work there. They're struggling to have students. Even when I was a student at KCU, this was, I enrolled there 12 years ago. So, at this point, it feels long time.
I enrolled 24 years ago.
Right. But even when I was there, we had questions about, how strict should university be? I mean, we had at least two different guys
Okay.
in the Bible and ministry department that were in my class. Well, I guess the one was 1 year younger than me, but he graduated with me because he was a bit more excelled in his on his pace of his classes. But they both met their girlfriends at Kentucky Christian University, and they both got them pregnant while they were students enrolled at Kentucky Christian University, and both of them were permitted to continue on with their education and graduate from there. Now I know both of these guys personally, and I think that they're good guys, and so for me, I didn't necessarily have as big of a problem with it because I thought, well, these are good guys, they made a mistake, let's have some grace and go from there. But I also knew the situation. And when you are
Sure.
closer to people and you know their hearts, you tend to be a bit more graceful with who they are. So, in a roundabout way, that's just me
Yeah.
talking about, the struggles that Christian universities have upon
Yeah.
them today, because unfortunately, whenever you make a decision, whether it be to have grace, to not have grace, whatever you want it to be, there's always going to be somebody upset and saying, you didn't do this right. This should have gone a different way. Dan, that kind of leads us into the next part of this, which is less to do with the actual story and more just to do with the idea of division in the church today and division in Christian universities and just in Christianity in general. There are so many things that can divide us today that seems like we may never actually fully get along. Just your overarching thoughts, Dan, and you can relate it to this story or my story or whatever you want it to be. But,
Sure.
what can Christians do to try and not be divisive today, to try and not be so divided and try to find common ground? Maybe they don't believe exactly the same things. Maybe there's something going on that is hindering their relationships with the church or with each other or whatever it might be. But what are some of your thoughts on Christians staying united today and going away from division?
Well, it's a complicated question.
Yeah.
It's hard to answer in just a single general thought. Hang on a second. Let me, I'm getting a phone call. Let me send him to voicemail. Here we go. So I'm on FCC Talk. I'm talking to other people right now, buddy. Okay. But so it's hard to answer generally, but I think that the main thing in terms of division, in terms of, these situations where we find ourselves at odds and even fighting, it really is to try to just avoid sin as much as possible and to try to walk as closely to the Lord as we understand how. The scripture is very, very clear that every single one of us bears the responsibility to seek God out personally and to know him personally. Work out your own salvation with fear and trembling, that instruction right there. And I think that is central to this, because when we look at stories like this news article here, when we look at situations like what you were describing at school, what's the common thread between both of those? Both of those are examples of what happens when sin enters into the inner workings of the church, or into the inner workings of a Christian person's life. When sin enters into the equation, bad stuff happens. It's almost, to me, it looks like, Satan lobbing grenades in or something, trying to blow stuff up, because that's exactly what's happened at this university. It's all blown up. There's this big, huge, burning crater mess that they're trying to put the fire out now. And why? It's all because one person allegedly, allowed his sinful desires to get the better of him and probably did something really stupid. I tend to side more with the school in this case, than him, because it's pretty obvious he did something. And in my brain, it's like, come on, man, you work for Calvin University. What did you expect? You know what I mean? But that's a whole other thing. But the main thing is that sin entered the picture. And so in terms of division, of course, what did Christ pray for? He prayed for unity. He wanted us to be united. But we also know, just from reading the New Testament, we're not always going to agree on everything theologically. There's going to be disagreements. We're going to have slightly different interpretations. But if we are all trying to follow the Lord as best as we can, working that out on a personal level and trying to stay true to what he's taught, I think we'll have a much better shot at getting along.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think what you said about, avoiding sin and those things, that's just completely, we have to do that. And also, if you do find yourself caught up in sin, you need to accept the fact that there are consequences for your sin. And
that's right. Bad stuff is going to happen. Mm-hmm.
Right. That's easy for me to say as somebody from the outside looking in. However, I've been there before where there have been consequences to my sin, and I'm not exactly happy about it, but I've recognized that, I strayed from God, I sinned, and this is what happens.
This is what I get.
God's punishments for our sin is not, it says it in the Bible, it's not for us to just be having a bad life. It's for us to learn from, and that our consequences are actually, our punishments are actually a blessing from God, that they are given to us. And it's hard to see that and hard to recognize that, but that's what we're called to do, is to trust in God and trust in what he's doing in our lives. So I realize that that's a very difficult thing to do, because I've had to do it in my own life. And so, like I said, for somebody on the outside looking in, it's kind of like, well, you have no idea what I'm going through. And yeah, you're right. And sometimes you will receive grace, and that will be a beautiful, beautiful thing. And if you do receive it, that's only, one more reason why you should praise God that other people are able to give that to you, and further understand the grace that has been given to you through Jesus Christ on the cross. So,
right on.
All right, Dan. Well, what do you say we skip to our next story here? This is
let's move on to the next article party.
Yeah, the article.
Because this one's weird, man. This is a weird one right here.
Yes, and I do want to say that, there will be things that we most likely talk about in this.
This one's going to go very deep into the opinion area too. Okay, like this one, yeah.
This is one that you will probably need to read the article yourself just to try to distinguish what is, because it's going to be very difficult for me to say, now this is from the article, now this is my opinion. So it's going to be best for you to read the article on this one if you can.
Get out your mental salt shaker and take all of this with a grain as we're talking here.
Right. There are theories and things like that about it that we will discuss. We'll probably give our thoughts on the theories, but anyway, to not get too deep into it before we actually talk about it, Mark Driscoll has slammed the Jezebel Spirit for what has happened at a megachurch, right? What has happened at a megachurch during a men's conference called, it's James Rivers Church. They invited a sword swallower. His name is Alex Magala. I'm terrible with last names. I apologize.
Close enough.
Not only is he a sword swallower, but he's also a male stripper. And so he was
an adult entertainer.
Yeah, whatever you want to call it. So he was invited to this conference to perform his sword swallowing routine.
In front of a bunch of all Christian men. Okay? Yes. All men.
Yes. We can talk about the questioning of if that was the best decision in the world, but essentially, Mark Driscoll came out onto the stage and stood up and basically denounced this whole entertainment, whatever you want to call it, called out the Jezebel Spirit and what is going on here, which if you don't know what Mark means by the Jezebel Spirit, it's something that he often references for, I don't have the best description for it in mind, maybe you do, Dan, but just sexual sin, something that...
Well, Mark Driscoll actually believes the Jezebel Spirit is a incarnate demon from the spiritual realm. Like, he believes there is a very specific entity called the Jezebel Spirit, the Jezebel demon or something like that, that has been working since the beginning of man with a very specific goal of seduction.
Yes. And if I talked about Mark Driscoll like everybody knows who he is. Dan and I are quite familiar with who he is because we listened to a podcast. What was it called, Dan? Mars something, Mars
Oh, for
Hill,
crying out
something like
loud.
that.
Yeah,
But
the rise and fall of Mars Hill. And I've done a lot of additional reading since then too, out of curiosity and
yeah,
trying to figure things out.
it is honestly a very crazy story.
Oh, it's
And I felt
wild
like
ride.
it's from Christianity Today. We don't reference Christianity Today on here very often because a lot of their articles are paid for, and I try to find stuff that you all don't have to pay for to read. But essentially, it was done by Christianity Today, and I felt like it was well done. I don't like
It
everything
was good.
Christianity Today does, but the
Yeah, that was
podcast
good.
version, I think it was like 8 parts or something like that, tells the story of Mark Driscoll starting the church, how the church grew to such high heights, and then how it fell, and kind of what happened with the people afterward, and then a little bit about what Mark is doing now at Trinity Church down in Arizona. So that's another piece. I'll try to link that one in the description as well if anybody wants to do that. It's not like the Hillsong.
No, the HBO Max
Yeah,
documentary or whatever it was. No,
it's
that
not
was
like
very
that.
planted. That was, yeah.
This one I appreciated. There was so much storytelling and there was so much testimony and, learning about the whole situation and what can we learn from it. I learned a lot as a church leader from it. But anyway, that's where kind of the whole story of Mark Driscoll comes from. And he's been very well known for kind of these outbursts of men and, denouncing sexual spirits and demons and things like that, which I'm not necessarily saying is a bad thing, but this is kind of what he is known for and what he
Yeah.
does. So, Dan, obviously I've gone into this a lot, a lot more background than maybe I planned on doing, but just your thoughts on this whole situation. I know the James River Church senior minister, his name is John Lindell. He indicated that Mark Driscoll was out of line. They actually escorted him off the stage and didn't want him up there anymore, it sounded like. And so your thoughts on, do you agree he was out of line? Do you think that this was maybe something planted by the church? What are your thoughts here?
Okay. Been reading about this for a couple of days now and from a couple of different perspectives. And I've seen a number of comments online, people talking about this and having a lot of different opinions. So, and I've given this personally a lot of thought. And where do I even begin? Let me tell you what my thoughts are first. I think that this is a very unique collision of personalities and events. Okay. I think that the organizers of the Stronger Men's Conference did something really stupid by having this guy perform. As a matter of fact, I think if I'd have been there, I probably would have walked out while he was performing because I've watched it and seen clips and it bothers me, and this, I don't know how you watch this without thinking it was meant to elicit some kind of, arousal reaction type thing. It's very, very, it bothered me. Anyway, I think that was just a very, very brain dead move on the part of the organizers. I don't know what they were thinking. Nobody knows what they were thinking, but it wasn't the right thing to be thinking. And then to follow it up, you invite a guy like Mark Driscoll. Now, Mark Driscoll, if you know his personality, he is a very challenging person to try to interpret because he does have a lot of views. He expresses a lot of points of view that I do actually agree with. However, who he is morally and personally, the actions that he has taken, and a lot of the language that he uses it's very showy. Okay. Now we're starting to get into Dan's opinion. Okay. This is Dan's interpretation of what he has seen from Mark Driscoll. Mark Driscoll says a lot of things to make Mark Driscoll sound like Mark Driscoll knows what he's talking about. Okay. And I don't say that, I don't want to knock on him too hard, but to me, he's very hard to trust. For example, him talking about this Jezebel spirit, right? I don't even agree with him I don't even know where he would think he would get information on there being this very specific demonic entity. We know that seduction and sexual sin is very, very real. I mean, it's discussed at length in the
All over
Bible.
America.
It's everywhere. But does that mean that there's a specific demon associated with, like, what? Did he get that from some like medieval grimoire or something and then decided to just treat it as absolute truth? Who knows? But anyway, now in his defense, if Mark Driscoll came out on that stage and was truly convicted by the Spirit of God to call out this absolutely boneheaded thing that they opened up a men's conference with, right? I think he was perfectly in the right to do so. As a matter of fact, when these kinds of things happen, they need to be called out, okay? And they need to be corrected. And I think that there is a very serious lack of public accountability that we keep in the church. When this kind of stuff happens, I mean, and obviously Lindell, is it James Lindell, who's the pastor of the church? Jon Lindell, he was obviously probably incredibly embarrassed because this is his home turf, right? And so he pulled Mark out, and according to the article, they made nice, and Lindell's talking about how Mark's a modern day prophet. He says, Driscoll says, Lindell is such a great father to his church family and stuff like that. From those comments, I've heard a lot of people say that they believe that this whole thing was staged, that this was set up to give Mark a platform to make a very bold statement, which would get his name back in the headlines. I think that's a bit of a stretch. When these two are throwing this language back and forth, the fact of the matter is they exist in an echelon where, in order for them to be able to maintain their position and their clout, they kind of need to be able to repair these bridges, right? For public image and that sort of thing. There's a lot of politicking that goes into it, unfortunately. So it is just, once again, this to me is similar to the last article where, these are kind of consequences of people's shortcomings and weaknesses and even failures, right? I see Mark Driscoll as a guy with some very, very good ideas who is a very challenging personality. And anyway, and with the church, they just blew it with this call. Absolutely blew it. I'll quit talking. You tell me what you think.
Yeah, so just in some fairness, I will note what the article says, that the church did have the idea based on Alex's performances on America's Got Talent and Britain's Got Talent, which are both famous for being family-friendly entertainment for all ages. I haven't watched American Talent or Britain's Got Talent in years, so I cannot confirm nor deny if that's the case, but that is what they cited here in the article about that. So, I mean, I agree, Dan. I think that, for a long time, the idea has been nobody can be on stage at church if, they have some kind of sin going on in their life or something like that. And I do wonder if that's possibly been overblown to some extent, to nitpick at people's lives and say, well, you're not perfect, so you can't be on stage. Nobody's perfect. However, I do think that at a certain point, somebody is known for something outside of, what they're doing on stage in their life. And maybe that isn't the best person to put on stage or to provide entertainment for people at a men's conference that is focused on male, I almost said male empowerment, but male spiritual growth and guidance. So for me, you do have to look at the background of the person and who they are.
You have to do your research. Yeah. And you have to show a certain level of discernment. You know what I mean? And to me, we have and I'm going to throw all of us into this boat. Okay. I'm going to throw all of us in there because I don't like pointing fingers and say, those people over there, they're so bad. I hate doing that. So what I'm going to say is that we as a church, we as the body of Christ in the United States of America have become so entranced and focused on spectacle that we are losing our ability to discern its appropriateness for certain situations. We think, and we're such an entertainment focused culture. And that's probably what this was. I really doubt that the organizers of this conference had anything malicious in mind. Okay. I really, really doubt that. I have a feeling this was probably just a discernment situation where there was either a lapse in judgment or they just didn't consider, the deeper potential. I mean, you and I have had these conversations when we've picked like plugs and sermon bumpers and stuff. Like I remember agonizing over one. I think it was like a single sermon bumper where there was a shot of a woman sitting in a pasture, like holding a flower, but she was in shorts. And I remember asking myself the question, can you see too much of her legs? You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
this was something I found on like Worship House Media or something like that. And I'm not saying, oh, what a good job I did or anything like that. I'm just saying you have to ask the questions. You have to try to consider the deeper impact of everything that happens, especially when you're projecting it in front of the body of Christ. And I think with the desire for spectacle, coupled with a lack of discernment, along with a pompous, bombastic guy like Mark Driscoll, you just created this weird, perfect storm of events that's transformed into this crazy story.
Yeah. No, I agree, and that's the hard thing, right? Is that, did this senior pastor Jon Rhoades pick out every single entertainment act that came out onto the stage? I imagine.
I doubt it.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, this is something that probably gets sent down to somebody who, helped run the event or something like that. They have
Yep.
probably had a team that they got together, and who knows, this could have been a team of interns that, knew nothing
Right.
else
Yeah.
about this person other than, hey, he was on America's Got Talent and Britain's Got Talent and did a good job, and so we're gonna bring him here and have him do a performance. So, I mean,
And they
I don't
may
want
have
to.
just, yeah, they just,
Yeah, I don't.
they may have just not done their research and didn't preview his act.
Right. And I think that was kind of where Jon Rhoades was coming from, is like he saw it and he probably thought, and this is my speculation
Yeah.
here, he saw it and he probably thought, wow, why did we do this?
Oh,
This is
no.
this was
Yeah.
not a
Well,
smart idea. And then Mark
yeah.
Driscoll comes out there and he starts going on and on and on, which again, I'm not saying Mark Driscoll was wrong. I do think we need to call stuff like that out in our society that we see as wrong. But then Jon Rhoades probably in his seat, like with his hands over his face, like, oh my gosh, what has happened? Now I've got
Well,
my main speaker
yeah.
for this men's conference going crazy on stage,
And
because of
Lindell
something. Yeah.
may have known that he needed to stop Driscoll because he may not have let it go for his entire talk. You know what I mean? And
Right.
so I'm sure, as with all things, there's more going on than we see through an article or even a few.
Right. I tend to believe the best in people. So call me naive, call me whatever you want if you don't think the same, and that's okay. I'm okay with my lifestyle choosing to believe in people.
Yeah. Well, and we don't know their motivations. We don't know why they did what they did. All we can see is what they did.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
And at the end of the day, I think we can all agree that, the church or whoever it was putting on the conference, made a poor decision, and Mark Driscoll, he ran with it. So I have one other
yeah.
question about this, Dan, before we move on.
Sure, sure.
I've seen people in our church share clips of Mark Driscoll and things like that before, and I'm not asking you to tell everybody exactly what they should or shouldn't believe here. In fact, I'll even go first so that way I have my opinion out there. But
Okay.
my question is, taking into account Mark Driscoll's past, which you and I are aware of because we've done our research, listened to a little bit more. I know not everybody out there has probably done as much research as we have, but is this somebody that you would look to for spiritual growth or spiritual guidance in your life? Like I said, I'll go first just so I can be transparent. For me personally, I don't go to Mark Driscoll. I wouldn't judge somebody if they said that they do listen to Mark and, find him to be a spiritual advocate in their lives or somebody that, really speaks to them. But based on the research that I've done, I do question a little bit of character personally. Not saying everybody else should, but saying personally, I do. Do I appreciate some of what Mark does? I do, because I think that Mark is willing to say things that other people aren't willing to say, and he's willing to kind of be out there and address issues that other people aren't willing to address. But after hearing some of the things that I've heard behind the scenes, not just from, oh, it looks like this happened, but the actual people from behind the scenes giving the stories.
There's a lot of
what went
eyewitness
down.
information.
Yeah. It seems like to me, there might be some questionable character there. So I'm very kind of on the fence with when it comes to Mark Driscoll. I
Yeah.
would not recommend him to somebody if they asked me for somebody that, is a good preacher that they could listen to on a certain topic. I wouldn't recommend him. But if somebody told me they were listening to him, I wouldn't necessarily tell him, like he's a terrible person and don't listen to him. I'm going to let people
Yeah.
make their own decisions. I don't know. Where do you stand on Mark Driscoll, Dan?
For me personally, I would absolutely never go to Mark Driscoll for any kind of spiritual growth. Like I said, we even do hold very similar opinions in certain areas, like in the terms of like men's responsibilities in the church and raising, strong men at home and things
Yep.
like that. There's also a lot of, I guess, what would you call them, like gender issues or something like that, on like women and
Yep.
stuff in the church that we don't agree on specifically. But for me, that's all moot because my problem with Driscoll is not what he says, it's who he is. And
Yep.
from my research and from what I have read and from what I have seen, I think he disqualified himself from from, carrying the banner of ministry years ago. And the fact of the matter is, if you do your research, you will find out that the image that he portrays on stage and the things that he says are completely incongruous with who he is behind the curtain. And he goes through a lot of effort to protect the image of who he is behind the curtain. I laughed out loud. I laughed out loud when I read this article you sent me, because one of the first things that Mark did when they asked him about what the Jezebel Spirit is was he plugged the book he wrote on it, because that's who he is. He is very much, now he may have a pure heart in terms of wanting to spread the gospel. I mean, I'm sure he has a lot of great motivations, but there is an enormous part of who he is that is a showman, and that is a braggart, and that is pompous and bombastic. And I do not trust Mark Driscoll at all. So I would recommend but he's got a lot of great sound bites, and he's even got sound bites out there that I agree with him. So if you just take him in sound bites, whatever. But if you actually get to know the man behind the sound bites, it gets a lot harder to take him seriously.
Right, and that's the whole issue, right? Is somebody's soundbite might sound really nice in our world of TikTok and YouTube Shorts and everything like that. A soundbite might sound really nice, but if you look at the entire story of his life and his leadership in the church, you would find many questionable decisions. And
he was a terrible leader in the last years of Mars Hill, and he seems to have carried that with him to Trinity.
Yeah, and one of the reasons that I tell people I'm not gonna really say like don't listen to him or something like that. I feel like my sharing of I don't really listen to him enough would hopefully spark the
Yeah.
idea of, well, why doesn't Jon listen to him? Maybe I should do a little bit more research here, and then I would
Yeah.
kind of believe that once other
Yeah.
people do research, they would find that Mark might have some good sound bites, but maybe he's not somebody I consistently go to from time and time again for spiritual.
Reiterate, these are our opinions.
Yep.
Right? These are just our opinions. Make up your own mind. Do your own research, work out your own salvation. This is just what we think, and take that for what it's worth.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there are tons of, what do you want to call them, celebrity preachers? I think that's what we called them in the last episode when we talked about TD Jakes.
It's a fitting title.
Yeah, there's so many out there, and I wouldn't even tell people don't listen to any celebrity preachers. There are ones out there that I enjoy listening to, and that I think have good content. For the most part, maybe I don't agree with everything that they say, but I think that I have enough discernment and my knowledge to be able to say, yeah, I do agree with that, or I don't agree with that, but to move on from there. So, and I think that's an important step in your Christian life, is to be able to say, do I agree with this or do I not agree with this? And to have the maturity to say, I can move on from here, or do I need to say something about this? So
it's a lot harder to be taken in when you're close to the Lord and the scriptures too.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. So All right, Dan, let's move on to our last subject here. This is a much happier
Let's end
subject.
on a high note, shall
Yeah,
we?
I always try to include something positive because if we don't, then it can be really, really easy. I mean, all these websites I go to, the ones at the top are always like, this this pastor fired, this going on, this, that, and the
Yeah.
other. And of course, it's not that they're pushing those to the top and saying, read this. It's that these are the most often clicked on ones. But this was a positive story that was near the top. So
Bring it on.
Feel pretty good about that. So if you are somebody who watches golf, you are probably familiar with this whole situation. But the 2024 Masters champion, Scottie Scheffler, he gave a lot of credit to God after winning the Masters. Now, this isn't a situation where he just said, give credit to God. Thank God for my life and all that I have. Now listen about how awesome I am. I try to stay away from those because they don't always feel super genuine to me. It's nice that they mention God, but it doesn't feel the most genuine. This one, however, as I read through it, felt very, very genuine from Scottie Scheffler. Yeah. Not only is he talking about how, he is thankful for God and for his, what he has, and been able to win and the talents that he has, but he's also sharing a story of the morning before he goes and plays in the Masters and how, he was, really struggling with kind of his competitiveness and how badly he wanted to win, but it was actually his buddies that were talking to him about, hey, no matter what happens, you are secure in Christ and just go out there, play your game, play the best of your ability. And remember, yes, you want to win, but at the end of the day, these are gifts and talents that God has given you in your life. And, your job is not to win golf tournaments. Your job is to be an example and a display for Christ in your life. And so, just a lot of really, really good content. I want to read this one portion in particular. Scheffler talks about the morning situation where he says, "My buddies told me this morning, my victory was secure on the cross. And that's a pretty special feeling to know that I'm secure for forever. And it doesn't matter, whether or not I win this tournament or if I lose this tournament." You don't typically hear somebody say before a golf tournament, it doesn't matter if I win or lose, and then they go out and they shoot a -11 on 18 holes, dude. Spectacular what he was able to accomplish, finishing 11 under on 18 holes. Just absolutely spectacular.
Just wild.
Wild. Wild. I have another quote I want to read, but we'll get your thoughts just on the whole situation, the story, him winning the Masters, all that stuff. Dan, what are your thoughts?
I just think it's incredibly inspiring because this is to me, and once again, this is just a little snippet of an article, but to me, this is who we should be in the world around us. Not all of us are out there winning golf tournaments. As a matter of fact, almost none of us are, right? We're just normal, everyday people going about our business, but what he expresses is complete truth. No matter what, our identity is secure. Win, lose on a day-to-day basis, we are secure in who we are in Christ. But whatever it is that God has given us, we're supposed to use it for his glory. And we can take an incredible amount of peace and security in that fact, because no matter what, we are who he says we are, not what we think or what the world says that we are. And we can basically just wear this same statement that he has made. And that is just a beautiful thing. And one of the things that we're called to do as Christians.
Yeah. Scottie even says, there's nothing wrong with having a persistent desire to win.
Absolutely not. Yeah. I think it's actually more admirable to try to win. Right. You know what I mean? We should do our best. Yeah.
But he also, this is the quote I was going to say later, after he talks about, it's not bad to have a persistent desire to win. He says, but at the end of the day, like I said, my identity is secure already, and I get to come out here and compete, have fun, enjoy it. And then at the end of the day, my identity is secure.
That's right.
Dan, I think this is one of the messages that people today, not just young people, I think people who are older, people who, even though they are mature in Christ, not that they need it, like they've never heard it, but need it kind of as a reminder. Some people have never heard it and they do need it in that way, but just this idea of identity, and who we are with so many different labels in our society. I know that, you know, people are trying to get away from labels as much as possible, but it's kind of like one of those things where it's like, no, any publicity is good publicity. Even if you strike down labels, just means there's more labels out there. But I appreciate that Scottie Scheffler is out here saying like, hey, I am a golfer and I do want to win, but at the end of the day, my identity is found in Christ. And I remember when I was at FCA camp, Fellowship of Christian Athletes, it really impacted me when my counselor there said, you know, because I was really, really into baseball, loved playing baseball, played it almost year round back then. And he said, you know, you're not a baseball player who just so happens to be a Christian. You're a Christian who just so happens to play baseball. And that stuck with me. And I felt like that with Scottie Scheffler here saying that. And I think it's an important reminder, not just for the youth who are in sports, but all of everybody who is in sports today. Dan, what are your thoughts on the statement and just his message of identity? I know he wasn't like giving a sermon here, but you know, that message is going to be spoken to other people. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that it's about the best summarization of that I've ever heard. Honestly, I mean, he just says it very, very plainly, and he's absolutely right. And I think that when we put Christ at the top, when we put Christ first, and when he is our number one passion and pursuit, that is what identifies us, and everything else becomes secondary. And we are all going to experience wins. We are all going to experience losses, but if Christ is at the top in our lives, then what else do we really need? You know? And when we do that, he gets the glory when we win. And he gets the glory when we are satisfied, even if we lose. Either way, he wins and we win with him.
For sure. For sure. And I mean, if you dedicate what you do to Christ and, you know, be an example for him and trying to, you know, show that in everything that you do. You know, that's something I tell the kids in chapel all the time. You know, a lot of them are into sports and a lot of them love to play baseball, all the different kinds of things. And, you know, sometimes the question is, you know, well, how can I serve God by playing baseball? And it's like, well, you play baseball for God. And that whole mindset, once you have that mindset, it's a much bigger deal. And even for people today, you know, if you have a desk job, do that desk job for God. You know, if you're a contractor, you know, you're a contractor for God. Do right by your people, you know, work hard, do the things you need to do. And at the end of the day, if you have somebody that you come in contact with that needs a friend or needs prayer, you know, you're there for them. So
that's right.
I do a podcast on sports stuff, and I had a guy who came on a couple weeks ago and he was telling me about some issues he was having. And I told him that I'd pray for him. Told me, don't bother. I don't believe in God anyway. I said, you know what? Still going to pray for you. So
you can't stop me.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, it's like one of those things where I showed him I cared and, you know, he appreciated that. Maybe he didn't appreciate the prayer so much, but at the end of the day, you know, yes, I have this hobby that I do in my free time, but at the end of the day, it's not just because I like sports or anything like that. It's, you know, it's for God, and I'm going to live my life every way I do for him. So
right on. All right.
Dan, any additional thoughts on this story? If not, do you have any thoughts on as we exit the podcast here?
Not particularly. I just encourage everybody to go and read this story about Scottie, just because it's very uplifting and he just spells it out so plainly. I think we can all relate to it. And so I would just encourage everybody to check that out. And just also, it's cool to see God working in every single corner of the world, even in golf. It's really cool.
Yes, totally is. Anything coming up at the worship ministry or anything like that at church, Dan, that people need to know about?
Anything coming up? Well, nothing really big coming up soon. I mean, I'll be talking here on the podcast again, I'm sure, in a couple of weeks. And we do have some stuff in the pipeline for summer. But, you know, here in the near future, I just encourage you, if you're listening to this and you're looking for a service opportunity, reach out to me. We're still looking for some people to help us helm things kind of behind the scenes, so you don't even have to set foot on stage, because I know most of us, we would rather not be up there in front of everybody, and I don't blame you. So we've got some behind the scenes stuff we could really use some help with. Just reach out to me, and that's about it for now. There'll be more stuff coming later.
And truthfully, the behind the scenes stuff is not the most difficult.
It's most of it's pretty straightforward. And I will work with you. I won't hand you something that either makes you uncomfortable or we feel like isn't a good fit. You know what I mean? We'll work it through.
Yep. And you always train people and stuff like that as well. So they have a good
we try.
Of it. It's not like that live streaming that's so complicated. I'm just kidding. The live streaming is not complicated either.
It is. Yeah. No, that's the thing. Nothing up there is that complicated. It's just,
Yeah. Some of it's just press this button on a timely manner.
Yeah. Move this thing up.
Yeah.
And you're done. Right. Yeah.
There you go.
And then remember,
all right, everybody. Thank you so much for coming and listening to FCC Talk. Thank you, Dan, for coming on here, sharing your thoughts about the stories today. If you have any questions, always feel free to reach out to us. Like I said, links for the articles are in the description. I will also add the Mars Hill podcast in there as well if you want to listen to another podcast throughout the week or something like that. Long episodes, so it'll take you more than a week, but definitely good content. If you do listen to it, let Dan and I know, because we like to talk about it, and there's not many people to talk about it with other than each other and Chris.
Yeah, pretty much.
We all know our opinions, but we'd love to hear from you all if you listen to it and have any thoughts. So thank you so much, everybody. Have a good one. We'll see you next time.